There we go, Sam. So congratulations on you've got the second rando slot after the big summer break. So congratulations.
Oh, well, thank you. And yeah, hopefully your trip went well and you're getting back into the groove of things in a more normal. Well, I noticed you've been posting a lot more videos.
Yeah. Well, being home has enabled that. So
Yeah, no, it's funny. I know there's no shortage of your videos online, but yeah, YouTube is not like the most like mobile friendly thing sometimes though. And
no.
like Google Podcasts only keeps podcasts like 2 to 3 months back, I believe. So
Yeah.
so
Podbean has the whole, because Podbean hosts my audio podcast and that has the whole catalog. Some people have wanted me to put it on Spotify. If I do put it on Spotify, then I'll probably erase like the first 2 years of it because there's some technical reasons for that. So, but it still has the entire archive. But,
okay. Well,
YouTube
no
does too. They
complaints
keep
here.
it too.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, why don't we begin by, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Okay, yeah, so I'm, 36. Yeah, I'm a Michigander, so though I was born in Kalamazoo, but I actually lived most of my life in Southeast Michigan in the Detroit area. So, yeah, both my parents were from Michigan. My father grew up in the Battle Creek area, and my mom, she grew up in Kalamazoo area. So, and yeah, his parents were from the Missouri-Kansas border area, and hers were from a little town. You're probably familiar with South Haven.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think she probably has, I don't know, I guess somewhere between 30 to 40 family members live in South Haven.
Okay.
Apparently when my grandparents moved to Kalamazoo, which is, for people not familiar with Michigan, about 45 minutes at the most from South Haven. Apparently it was a big kind of controversy in the family at the time. So, but this was in the early 60s. So
Okay.
I don't think, anything anyone's still upset about.
So how did you grow up? Did you grow up going to church or not going to church?
Yes, I did. So yeah, my parents, they were both along with an uncle of mine. They were Pentecostal converts in their 20s. So they had both grown up in, I guess, what they kind of call like Bible churches, or I've heard people refer to them as non-denominational churches too. But yeah, it's kind of interesting actually. They were both going to Western Michigan at the time, though they didn't meet as students. They met through a Bible study in a city called Pawpaw. If you have any This American Life listeners, there's an episode where, I don't know, I guess at the time there was a lady who had been just kind of riding through on like a Greyhound, and there was a giant poster that said Pawpaw for Jesus, which she thought was, I don't know, just the funniest thing ever. I'm not really sure why she thought it so funny, but regardless, she did. And I'm pretty sure that's probably a church that sponsored the Bible study that my parents met at. Because, yeah, Pawpaw is not a very big place. So.
No. There is a
yeah.
Christian Reformed church in Pawpaw. There was a good friend of mine that was his first call out of seminary. It was the church in Pawpaw, Michigan.
Oh, okay. All right. So. Maybe it was his church that had the banner.
Probably not.
Yeah, no, that sounds more like a Pentecostal thing than
yeah,
kind of thing to me. So, but yeah, so yeah, so with
so
that,
you were raised going to Bible churches?
No, we I went to Pentecostal churches for until I was in my 20s. So, and yeah, no, with that, I guess I was just kind of thinking back around it. So the church that we had been going to, it was in Ypsilanti, which is a town kind of close to Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And it's a manufacturing.
Ypsilanti with a Y for those who are taking notes.
Yep, not Ypsilanti, as I heard one lady referred to it on, I believe it was Fresh Air, no less than 4 or 5 times. Ipsy, you could say, if you ever meet anyone from there. So that with that, yeah, there was a Ford plant and a GM plant there, both of which closed, and it put, gosh, yeah, a lot of stress on the church community there at the time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
One of the things is that, yeah, the churches I grew up in, they were pretty much self-financed. So with that, I don't know if Christian Reformed churches are a little bit different, but
They're self-financed too.
okay. Well, I know some denominations, they do help like sponsor different churches and things like that. And yeah, no, unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure in the community and just a lot of things that happened. But at the end of it, there was a yeah, something of and I think it is the right word, because it wasn't just people decided they liked the music at another church better, but there was something of a schism within the denomination in that area. And yeah, that must have been, yeah, sometime around 2010. I actually had lived in other states around that time. I went to graduate school and lived in a few other places when I was in my 20s. So in some ways, I'm happy I'm not better informed on everything that happened there. But well, you know, churches can be, they're filled with humans, right?
They are indeed.
So, and yeah, we're made in God's image, but sometimes we come up short.
Yes, indeed.
So, but yeah, so, but you know, I guess I would have been happy to continue to be associated with those churches, but basically they hadn't, I don't know, they never done a lot of things with other churches to begin with. And then with that, they basically, after that had happened, the social life and the church only revolved around basically that one congregation. And I don't know, I guess it's just something that I think back, and I guess it kind of makes me a little bit sad, because I think about it, and I think the other ministers in that denomination would have said, oh, we're doing something against this preacher or what he's doing. But ultimately, I mean, the church is still there and the minister's doing fine, but I felt like it was more the people in the congregation who really kind of suffered. So that, yeah. So, and I don't know, like I said, I lived in a few different places in my 20s. And I guess when I was around in my late 20s, I had bought a home for the first time. And there was nothing that really like upset me about the leadership, like any abuses or any doctrinal things, but it was something where I guess I didn't even realize it at the time, but I was kind of resentful for a few years, because I would go and I would show up to church on Sunday, and this would be a church, not a massive church. It wasn't like Willow Creek or anything like that, but maybe 200 to 300 people. And there would literally be less than 5 other people who were single and in their 20s. So yeah, so I'd been thinking about, okay, and yeah, and I don't really have much of a social life at work either. So it's one of those things where I'd been looking for maybe being involved a bit in with other churches, and there was a RCA church in Ann Arbor that I had tried it at first because it worked into my schedule, honestly. And yeah, I was going there for a couple of years, and that was a really good experience. And yeah, I will say one thing: if there's anyone who's in a congregation where they feel like they're kind of like the odd one out in whatever way, that I guess it took me being somewhere else maybe to really start to appreciate more things like, for example, I think one couple in the church I'd grown up with, and they have a daughter who has some physical disabilities. And when I think of just the patience and the love they have with her, and even though I know it's not always easy, the love they have for each other too, and I just think of that, and that's a really good blessing that I've had through the years. But that's something when I was focused on, I don't know, what am I doing here? I'm I'm like the only single person in my 20s in this medium-sized church. I couldn't concentrate on those things or appreciate those things. And I felt kind of like I was just, I don't know, concentrating and focusing on what wasn't there at the time. So, and then so after that, so for, I don't know, reasons that are, I won't get into all the details, but I had sold my home in Ipsy, which it was a good thing. But with that, I had actually moved, I got a apartment in Detroit after that. And Detroit to Ann Arbor is a little far for church. So, and that was also around the time of COVID. And I had gone to a PCA church a number of times, was somewhat involved with, down there. But I guess at that time, I also started dating my wife now. So that's by way of explanation for if anyone else is watching this, that's a new development since I had seen Paul, West Michigan. So anyways, with that, I like the community, and I like a lot of things with the church, but it was, like I said, I started dating my wife at the time, and I do think that it's probably a little more conservative than our for our family.
Did you meet your now wife at that church, or was it just concurrent?
I was just concurrent. Okay. So, and there were a lot of people from different areas, but we had I met. I guess it's the most common way to meet people now, so I shouldn't be at all ashamed.
Everybody's afraid to say they met their wife online, but that's how everybody's doing it.
Not Tinder, but Bumble.
Yeah. No, it has become the most common way. 10 years ago, people would really say it under their breath, but now it's almost assumed.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Actually, I have an aunt who she had met her husband in an AOL chat room in like 1997. So I've known at least a few people had met online.
I know a lot.
Yeah. So, and he was living in Arkansas at the time, and she was living with her parents in Kalamazoo after divorce. So, yeah. We met online. She was living in Central Ohio at the time in Findlay, but her family is, her parents were born in Vietnam, but her family in the States had been sponsored by a church in the Lansing area.
Yeah. It's not uncommon. A lot of churches in the Midwest sponsored families from Vietnam.
Yeah. So, and she had been raised Catholic, but she hasn't been real active in recent years.
Yeah. It's also not uncommon. So how did you find me? And now, how long have you been watching? That's an interesting question, because many who have found me 4 years ago. So.
Oh, okay. So I had found your channel. It was probably, I want to say May of 2021, I want to say.
Oh, so you're fairly recent.
Yeah, because, at the time I had been listening to the rise and fall of Mars Hill. And I was looking for different reaction podcasts. So, I know who Jordan Peterson is, but I can't say that I've ever followed his stuff real closely, honestly. And the other people on the channel, Vervaeke, Peugeot, Tom Holland. Those are all new people to me. So.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So.
So what struck you about the rise and fall of Mars Hill?
Yeah. So I guess I was thinking about this, and I don't know. To me, this seems like the most boring thing in the world, but people seem to find it interesting. So I had when I was kind of in graduate school, been just kind of looking for different things to read. And like I read probably like Chesterton and Bonhoeffer and probably most of Lewis's published work at the time. And I remembered going through, it was about the 2010 like best books of the decade list. And one that I don't know, it boggles my mind a little. I don't know, he's an okay writer, but the book itself, I think, is kind of a mess. But one of the Christian books that was on a lot of lists was Blue Like Jazz by Donald Miller.
Donald Miller,
yeah,
yes.
So, yeah, but I think he's actually a pretty good writer, but that's not the book of his I would really recommend. If people were looking to read his book, gosh, I wish I could remember the name of it, but about bicycling. I want to say like A Journey of 1,000 Miles. I think that's a pretty good book.
Oh, interesting. He's an interesting guy.
Let's read. Yeah, well, it's weird.
And he's still around out there too.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I guess he still considers himself a Christian as far as I know, but he's not affiliated with any church or anything like that. Yeah. But you know, it's weird because like if you read the book and you're not paying close attention or you don't have much of a faith background, you would think that it was almost about I think he even uses the term like a non-religious spirituality, but everything in the book, like he advocates, gosh, I'm trying to think, church attendance, tithing, the virgin birth. The authors he mentions he likes are, well, here's a Murderers Row, Ravi Zacharias, Mark Driscoll, Joshua Harris. So they all tend to be on the more conservative side, but yeah. So yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't know, but I guess like his recently he's kind of adopted a kind of, I don't know, spirituality that you might think he would have had if you hadn't paid too close of attention to the book, where he still considers himself a Christian, but isn't affiliated with any formal church. But yeah, so anyways, one of the things he talks about in the book is Mark Driscoll, and he describes Mars Hill as a church of NPR listeners and hippies, which it still is a bit of a mystery to me why Mark Driscoll had developed such a following among people who consider themselves to be liberals.
Is that true? Because, you know, I've had Tripp on my channel and he's no liberal.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you listen to the Mars Hill podcast, and it seems to me a lot of those people, like that's part of the kind of like the issue, I think, of what had happened with the church. I mean, they would said that they kind of consider themselves, I don't know, well, hippies and NPR listeners, right? I mean, so
yeah, but Pacific Northwest hippies are different. I mean, the Pacific Northwest culturally is a different place than anywhere else in the States.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, they're not Montanans, though. I mean, there were people who lived in Seattle.
But there's a guy, you know, there's like Nate. I don't know if you know who Nate Heil is. He's very much in this community, and he does videos. He has Grail Country, and I mean, because defining Nate, I mean, he's by no means some dyed-in-the-wool conservative. But he's also, you know, by no means some, you know, radical progressive either. I mean, a lot of these Pacific Northwest people are sort of hard to define.
Yeah. Well, I think it'd be a good question for Tripp. But I do think a lot of people who went to church there probably would describe themselves as progressives or liberals. But so at least today, I don't know about the time.
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. Because when you listen to that podcast and you listen to some of the stories that people sort of intimate after sort of where they went in the blow up of Mars Hill.
Yeah.
Oh boy, it's just such interesting. It's just such interesting stuff.
Yeah, but yeah, so I guess with that, I had started listening a little bit to Mark Driscoll's sermons, and I will say this: I don't particularly think of myself as someone who, I don't know, has a real great judge of character. But growing up in Pentecostal churches, I had been around, well, to be clear, all my pastors were men of God that I have been happy to be associated with. But I mean, you do come across more, I don't know, kind of entrepreneurial minded and very type A kind of personalities. And I kind of picked up pretty quickly, like, oh yeah, this isn't great what's going on here. So, but yeah, I will say though, I do think Mark Driscoll has this like kind of I don't know, personality where if you drew a Venn diagram and you had like Despicable on one side and Admirable on the other, he's in this like very narrow crossover. And I think a lot of like people on like reality television like also have that going on. Like I think of like the Kardashians are in some ways pretty impressive people, but yeah. So as a personality,
I love that.
kind of found it like interesting that, yeah. So and yeah, I guess with that, yeah, so there were a couple different Mars Hill reaction pods that you did. If people are looking for one, the round table one you did, I think
that was fun.
That was really a really good podcast. So yeah, so yeah, I'm trying to think in terms of other things I guess people might be interested in. I guess I've been thinking, I think you had at one point had said, oh, well, if you want to talk about like deconstruction or things like that, then that's something that the channel's kind of interested in. And I mean, I guess if deconstruction is just looking at your faith from a literary or sociological or psychological standpoint, then, well, and I guess maybe a non-orthodox one too, then I guess I can get behind that. And I feel like a lot of the people are a little bit younger than me here, but I do remember being in my 20s and encountering stuff where they talked about faith in the Bible and those kind of things from I guess from a Pentecostal perspective, it's always very kind of prescriptive, the way people talk about faith. So like I remember just having, I don't know, listening to things and reading things that were a little less so was definitely kind of interesting. Like I remember Krista Tippett, the NPR host, her program Speaking of Faith, which I think is still on, but has a little bit different focus these days. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I remember, I don't know if it's anywhere online because, oh gosh, I sound like an old person saying this, but I think I watched it on VHS, but Bill Moyer's series on Genesis is really good too. So yeah, I haven't, watched any of like the Franciscan college lectures or things like that. It seems like people are constantly on my case, like, oh, you should really watch these. But maybe I'll get to that in a bit. I don't know. I assume they're available on podcast form somewhere, right?
Probably.
Okay, so yeah, because I'm actually not in front of my computer that often. Well, you met my rambunctious little puppy, and she, yeah, sometimes she's not too happy if I'm just sitting in front of the computer at night. She's like, we need to go out. So it's better to listen to things when I'm walking, I feel like. Yeah. So, okay.
So what did you have anything in mind for that you wanted to talk about when we met today, or?
I guess I do have a few kind of questions for you, and so I don't know. I guess I there's a couple things I've been curious about in watching the channel that but I don't know if you've addressed these in other videos, but I guess like what kind of music do you have at Living Stones? When is it like performed kind of traditional music, or is it more the I guess I want to be too stereotypical. Is it like the AME handbook or handbook?
Well, right now, so if you go to the Living Stones YouTube
Okay.
channel,
Yes. Okay.
you can see exactly what we've got going.
Okay.
Right now, we used to have 4 worship leaders that would each sort of take a Sunday,
Okay.
and they'd all do different things. And
Okay.
so for a long time, the music was very eclectic. And one by one, these 4 either died or got sick or left.
Okay.
And so now we're down to 1. And
Okay.
so Pete does everything. And
Okay.
Pete kind of, so the Christian Reformed Church used to be big on hymnals. There was the Psalter hymnal that the Christian Reformed Church
Yep.
put out, and the last one they did was this gray hymnal that they put out. And since then, they've been putting out, they just put out a new hymnal recently. And so Pete's pretty much, for the most part, he's got a few songs that he brings in from CCM that a few people at church sort of cringe at. But he, for the most part, he sort of takes from that. He's been doing that for the last couple of years.
All right.
And I tend to keep my hands off of the musical selection here.
All right.
When I first got to the church, it was kind of a standard Christian Reformed church in that we sort of had the Christian Reformed liturgy, and I would just put Psalter hymnal numbers into the liturgy. And at the beginning of the service, they had what was called praise time. And one woman in the church would pick songs for that, and then I would pick the rest. It was so funny because there was this woman who she's passed now, both her and her husband, but she was a nurse in the county hospital ER. She was like the intake nurse, and she was just she would tell you exactly what was on her mind. It didn't matter how you felt about it. So one day she said to me, she said, "Pastor, Nina picks those songs at the beginning of the service, and you pick all the ones during the service?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "I like the songs that Nina picks better." I said, "That's okay, Hattie." So for the most part, I leave my hands off it, and I leave it to Pete, and then the elders sometimes give some input. But it's Living Stones worship is very eclectic, and that's one of the things that people, if they visit here, well, the church is really quite small now, especially after COVID. But one of the things that it's difficult for people to appreciate is just how diverse the church is.
Yeah.
And so you've got African-American folks, and you have folks who grew up CRC, and you got folks from just about all over the map. So music is pretty variable at Living Stones, and I don't tinker with it, because I believe that the people of the church should have a degree of say in what the church sings. So
yeah.
But it's mostly from that CRC, newest CRC hymnal.
Okay. What is the lead instrument? Is it usually
usually piano now?
Piano.
So we used to have enough people that we could have our own musicians, and about 4 or 5 years ago it became clear we didn't have that anymore. And so we've basically got some college kids who for a very low price play music for us, and that we've got a particularly good pianist now, which is really nice. He's a really sweet young guy. But it's again, people come to this church and they're like, what's going on here? This is not a nice evangelical church where you come in and they've got the big sound and somebody who really plays well, and it sounds something like Chris Rice or something like that. That ain't this church.
Yeah. No, I'm glad to actually hear that. And part of the reason I asked is because I was just sort of curious, because I guess a lot of those more, I guess, traditional kind of hymns, they don't sound the best as recorded music, because that's not what they were created to be. but I think of, like, for example, there's a famous church in Chicago, and with that, I remember going there. They probably had the most impressive organ I've ever seen, and like hearing a song like oh gosh, like "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," or um, oh gosh, I'm blanking now, but you get the idea behind it. The more
Yep.
traditional kind of hymns was quite amazing there. And
Yeah, and we haven't done that many traditional hymns over the last couple of years.
okay,
Pete usually sprinkles it in with a lot of the newer songs that have come
yeah,
in that newer hymnal. I wish we did more hymns, because the truth is, when it comes to congregational singing, those hymns were written for congregations to sing, and so much of the contemporary stuff is written for vocalists and musicians. So I actually prefer the hymns, but again, I don't tinker with the
yeah.
music of the people here at Living Stones.
I also have something of a flat voice, as my wife, who sang a cappella in high school, would inform you. So maybe that's why I prefer that music too. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Um,
So yeah, all you got to do is go to the Living Stones YouTube channel, and the whole services are there. So
okay.
and
Do
so
you do them live on Sunday
we
mornings,
do them
or?
live on Sunday morning. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're
Um,
streamed live every week.
okay. 10 a.m. West Coast time?
11 a.m. West Coast time.
Okay, all right. So I'd have to not watch some football, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And some of
do
the people in
watch this.
church they got their cell phones out and they're watching their fantasy team as they if the sermon
Oh,
gets a
yes.
little dull. So
Yeah. Yes, it is gosh, mobile gambling, is that a thing in California or not? It's
I don't know. I see, I'm
okay.
innocent to a lot of this stuff because I don't do it.
Yeah.
So I know that there's, fantasy football can be a big gambling thing,
Yeah.
but we just have a little league that used to be all from the church, and now it's sort of mostly from the church, but it's just this little
Okay. Yeah.
league that some of the people in the church have, and some people that used to be in the church have. So that's
Now,
about as
just
close as I get to it.
yeah, just recently in Michigan, the casino started having like online gambling that apparently you can do during the game. So hopefully no one's sitting in church doing that.
I don't think anybody's doing that. I think the one guy is watching his seeing how his fantasy team is doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, now there's gosh, a podcast I was listening to where the person was saying, "Oh yeah, I'm glad I was in church because I wasn't paying attention to the money I was losing gambling." Yeah, it was if you ever heard of a guy, Bill Simmons, it was one of the
oh,
podcasts
okay. Yeah.
on his
Yeah.
network.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
For some reason, that made me think of that. But okay, so gosh, I'm trying to think. I know I had a few other questions or things I wanted to ask you about. So, uh, oh yeah, let's talk a little bit about the marriage crisis.
Okay.
I might be like kind of at war with the board's kind of like perception of the marriage crisis, but I'll let you tell me, how do you define the marriage crisis?
Young men and women aren't getting married and having children. And there's plenty of blame to go around. Part of it is the culture. Certainly, I mean, anybody who today really wants to find a spouse and marry and have a child can do it. Because in some ways, because of apps and all these things, you can find a partner who's interested in marriage, and so in that sense, I wouldn't say that there are blockages for most people to finding a spouse and getting married. I would say that the kinds of cultural facilitation that was present when I was in my 20s in the 1980s is certainly no longer there.
Yeah.
Premarital sex, extramarital sex, just sex completely outside of marriage is now not only no longer frowned upon, at least by the general population, but in many cases assumed. And that is not unusual to find in churches.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
when I was in college, I remember a conversation in the dorm so this was a Christian college, this was Calvin College, kind of going around, you know, with our friends, figuring out who were, you know, all of us unmarried because we're in college living in the dorms, figuring out how many of us were virgins and how many of us weren't. And there was plenty of premarital sex happening at Calvin College in the 1980s. I know that, but it was generally understood as premarital sex in many cases. Whereas today, sex tends to be dating. And I think a lot of this extramarital sex is also part of the marriage crisis, because at least for people my age in the 80s, having licensed, legitimate, regular sex was a motivation, especially for men to marry. And I think for a degree, that's still the case in the church, at least in conservative churches. But I think out in the general population beyond the church, this has led to non-marriage. Because, and I think for a lot of men, I think there are a lot of women out there waiting for rings. And I think there's a lot of men not giving them because the men are getting the sex they want. And it's like, why buy the cow when you're getting the milk for free? And I know some people will hate that little phrase, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. And that's a part of it. And then there's a lot of cultural assumptions that say, you know, marriage is a bad idea because of divorce. And so how do you know if this is the right one? And so then maybe you'll marry before you have children, because there's still in our culture sort of a general assumption that the best way for a child to grow up is with the child's biological parents. And I'm happy that that's still in the culture. But I think a lot of that gets into the marriage crisis. So
Okay. Yeah, I guess I will say, as someone who has experience with online dating, that part of what it does is, well, if you think of like, just bear with me for a moment, The Godfather, and you think of Michael Corleone, and I forget his first wife's name, but his wife in Italy when they were dating, and like literally the whole village follows them as they walk around and they're on their date. If you think of that as like one extreme, and I guess in some ways using online dating, well, actually, especially using mobile apps, because you can't even really track those in like your history if you delete them or something, the way you can like internet dating sites. That's another. But I mean, there is something to be said for that, and it's not about sex, but just about the general kind of pressure that people feel a lot of times when they date, where there's a lot of expectations built into it. So there's something that can be refreshing and nice about having a time when you meet someone and you don't have those expectations, at least immediately. But the flip side is that you don't feel an obligation to that person either, in the way people probably did in more traditional forms of courtship, which I've heard that can lead to antisocial behavior. But yeah.
well, I think it's so my wife was watching a comedy show on Netflix, and it was a female comedian, and she was talking, and she put out her bona fides in terms of pro-choice and all of the stuff that you would expect for a comedian on Netflix to say. But then when it came, she was talking a lot about sex and dating and stuff like that. And, you know, but even so, she made it very clear that if a guy isn't interested in marriage and he just keeps dating, then he's wasting the woman's time. And it's pretty amazing for someone who located herself pretty much on sort of the standard progressive blue church frame to make the observation that still a lot of women They, just look at The Bachelorette. A lot of women want to find the love of their life, want to find their soulmate. They really want the wedding and the happily ever after story. A lot of women really want monogamy.
Okay.
And dudes, a lot of men want monogamy too, but a lot of young men are like, if I can get non-committed sex, or if I can get sex that doesn't cost me too much, I'm good with that. So there's a lot of that going on.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's definitely true. Yeah. Now, I guess I will say, with online dating, to circle back a little, another thing is it is true that you have more options, but in a sense, but at the same time, I know it goes back to the thing of not having a shared relationship or commitments where I would go through and I would go on dates and I would think like, okay, she's perfectly pleasant and we'll have a good time, but it's at the same time, am I going to change my whole life for this person or not? And it's like, especially if you're out of college and you're both working, I mean, even like dating somewhat casually in the sense of meeting together 2 or 3 times a week is a big change. It's like the answer more often than not was kind of just by default, like, nah, I don't really think so. But, and I know that a lot of people go through that where, relationships can be hard and it can be difficult when you don't have a shared commitment to anything with the person before you meet. Um, so I guess the part where maybe I'm a bit of a skeptic on the marriage crisis is, and I realize part of this comes with your kind of channel. It does tend to be more men than women, is that it's kind of framed as being about men not wanting to commit to women. And with that, so I guess I'm an accountant, so I guess I'm a bit of a data nerd, and I was looking at some of the stuff, and it is true that men, I believe 18 to 35, are the least likely to be married of any group. However, do you know the second most likely group not to be married?
I would imagine women over 50.
65, but yes,
65.
You're on the right.
Yep. Older women, because older women have, number one, been divorced, which they might have been the instigator, or the man went after someone younger, or number two, have basically, I know a lot of women over 65 who basically, especially in the Black community, who basically have said, I'm done with men. I've had, I've been married, I've had live-in boyfriends, I've done the whole, I've been through the whole menu. And you know what? I'm done with men.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that men, often over 65, are not done with women, but they want different things. Yeah. And a man over 65 can almost always find a woman, basically because there are a lot more women over 65 than there are men. And there are a certain segment of women over 65 that always want a man. I've known a number of women that if they're not living with a man, they're lonely, they want to be married. And so no, that does not surprise me at all.
Yeah. Well, small sample size, but I know the people in my family that are in that age range and are single had spouses who passed away.
Yep. There's a lot of that. Because men die younger.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so like if you look at the data though, it's kind of interesting because I guess women in the youngest age group are something like 14% more likely, I guess, to be married than men in that age group. So I guess despite
they're married to older men.
Yeah, despite changes in our culture, I guess. Well, I guess I'm in that situation myself. I mean, my wife's 5 years younger than
How
me.
old were you when you married?
I was 36 and
Okay. Now
she
that
was 31.
went back in the 1980s, that would have been unusual.
Yeah.
We were marrying a lot younger in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And it is not, I don't, it's easy today to find men over 30 and over 40 and sometimes over 50 who are finally ready to settle down and they want children. And so they're looking at women in their early 30s who are also at that point ready to settle down.
Yeah.
And at that point, the man has more financial resources, generally speaking, because he's had years to save and years to build up. And so I think actually we're going to continue to see more of that. So we're going to go to college graduations, and it won't be unusual to find men in their 70s who are fathers. Whereas when I went to all our college graduations, I was in my 50s because we had those kids in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
So no, you're right. You're looking at the data. It's right.
Yeah. Well, I will say small sample size again, but all three of my siblings did get married in their 20s, though my older brother has been subsequently divorced, and actually twice now. He's single currently.
Think he'll get married again?
I don't know, especially if this is going public. I don't think that's something I should speculate on here.
No, that's fine. Absolutely. Don't get personal on these things. Good.
Yeah, and my sister-in-laws, they both got married when they were in their 20s.
Yeah. But you're also from the Midwest.
Yes,
and you also grew up in a church. And so that will skew all of this back towards the older mean. Whereas out here on the West Coast, people who didn't grow up in churches, I find in this culture, one of the bigger motivations for marriage, if it isn't a desire for a more traditional family early on, is people get married before they're ready to have children. They've had plenty of sex before that, but it's like, okay, I want my kid to be raised in a household with a biological father and a biological mother.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So let's see. I don't know what you have going on, but I do see we're running a little short on the time. But I was going to get into the data, though, that made me a little bit hesitant about the marriage crisis.
No, go ahead. I'd like to hear it.
So, so the idea, I guess, that people are opting to have a friend's lifestyle, or if you will, maybe I don't know, How I Met Your Mother lifestyle. I don't know what the current show is, but it seems to be a little bit undermined by the fact that more people apparently, people are slightly less likely to be living with roommates than they were in the 90s. And they're, I believe, significantly less likely to be living alone. And they're much more likely, though, for people in their 20s to be living with parents. So, I mean, I don't know how permissive parents are in California, but I don't know too many parents myself if they had, if they had children in their 20s living with them, would necessarily want a rotating group of people they're dating around also.
Yeah, that's fair, but I think the West Coast is still more permissive than the Midwest on those scores.
Yeah, but so that was one thing. But then another thing was that people are, if you look at surveys, people are much less, I believe it's like, I want to say men in their 20s and 30s are 3 times less likely to be having sex than they were in the mid-90s, at least according to the surveys. I mean, I'm always a little bit skeptical about sex research surveys, but
well, you should be. But I think that's true too. But
I believe women are, I believe, about twice as likely to not be having sex as they were in the 90s. So I guess
twice as likely to not be having sex?
Yeah, not having sex. Yeah.
I would chalk a lot of that up to the ubiquity of pornography too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm sure that has something to do with it. But
I think people are having sex by themselves a lot more.
Yeah. Well, I guess well, this is the other thing too. It's the reason though that it seems to me, and I wouldn't put you or anyone in the channel in this category, but a lot of the people who claim to be most upset about the marriage crisis are not in favor of or deeply against what would be one of the more, it seems to me, kind of commonsensical um, solutions or ideas. There are a lot of people who want to be married and who aren't, which is the idea that, so this is another thing. So other surveys I've seen, and trust me, I do other things with my time to look at data. But it's just kind of, I don't know, it's interesting to me. But with that, so I've seen surveys where will ask men and women, what is most important in a partner, that they be financially stable, kind, or gosh, I'm trying to think of attractive. Yeah, it was the third one, basically. And I mean, if you think about it for like 3 seconds, it's actually kind of a dumb question, because you need a balance of all three for anything to work. You can't say, oh, I love this person and they're very attractive and I don't know, they've got money, but they hit me every night or something like that, right? I mean, obviously you need a balance of all three characteristics, or it doesn't work at all. So in some ways that's kind of a silly thing, but to ask. But with that though, by far the biggest criteria was that women, I think by about 30 percentage points, said that they wanted a partner who was financially stable versus men.
Yep.
So, and I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. But I guess if we're going to have a society, though, in general, where there's more or less, well, there's parity of opportunity, then I do think that at least, I guess here I go, maybe mansplaining, at least some more young women should probably be socialized to the idea that it's okay to have a partner who makes less or is less successful than they are. And it's one of those things where I know there's probably some, oh gosh, like YRR types listening to that, and like that's like nails on a chalkboard. But what I would say is, would you be in favor of, and I actually don't think this would necessarily be that crazy, but if like a conservative college that has professional degree programs, like say Pepperdine, if they said we're going to reserve like 3/4 of, mind you, I know this would be possibly be illegal, but regardless, we're going to preserve 3/4 of our seats in our program for men, because we feel like men need more opportunities. And I mean, I don't know, I guess I'd be interested in what people would say about that. But basically, I think if you believe in parity of opportunity, I don't know how you get away from the fact that there'll be more marriages in the future where women make more than men, or at least as much as men. And yeah, so I don't know what you tell your children about that kind of stuff or not. And you don't have to get into it.
I observe that, well, there's also, I mean, you mentioned you didn't listen to much Jordan Peterson. There's a lot of stuff like this. Peterson talks about some of this stuff.
Yeah.
That, I mean, marital satisfaction is higher, generally speaking, when the man makes more money than the woman.
Yeah.
I asked my wife once, because of course we got married in our 20s and neither of us had any money or anything like that. And both of us went into non-lucrative vocations, church work and school work, not the kind of, you don't make a lot of money as preachers and teachers. But I asked my wife, okay, let's say, I die, whatever, I'm out of the picture. How much money a year do you want your next husband to make? And I'll tell you, it's about 5 times what I make.
Okay. All
and
right. Well,
and you know, she was talking to me. She'd have been at a friends group or something, and she had met a bunch of women in their mid-30s that were expressing their frustration with not finding men. And she's like, these women, these are impressive women. They're good looking, they're
yeah.
professionals, they make a lot of money. Yeah, they're all expecting to find, you know, this is, we're in what was the guy's name? Samuels. We're in territory now where all these women are like, I want a guy who's making 2 or 3 times more money than I'm making. And it's like,
Yeah.
that population is really small. I want it, just like you said, I want a guy who's kind, I want a guy who's attractive, and I want a guy who's making more money than I am.
Yeah.
And Kevin Samuels would say, you know, there's about this many of those guys, and these guys, they get their pick. And they are looking for, they don't probably care how much money the women they're looking at are making. They're looking at physical attractiveness, number one, kind, number two, and then they don't care about the money because they've got plenty.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the mismatch here. And I think you're right. I think as in some ways, sociologically, this is a fact. This is one of these inconvenient facts that people don't like to pay attention to. But if you just ask people questions, you know, the same thing with women going into STEM. I've known a lot of young women that were like, women should go into STEM, and then they're not going into it. And I say, well, why don't you go into it? Well, I don't want to. Okay. Well, you know, are you telling all of these other hypothetical women that they should go into fields they don't want to? There might be something psychologically under the surface that makes you more interested in people than things. And then again, I mean, this is, and there's a lot of inconvenient truths out there with respect to these things. And so there are a lot of women. I have known some marriages where the woman is making a lot more than the man, and the man will stay home, and they might have 1 or 2 kids, and the man will be the, and there's some marriages that can work really well. But generally speaking, a lot of women, I know a lot of women too, that are like, gosh, if my husband made twice the amount of money he did, I'd quit my job and I wouldn't bother with a career. That sounds like a nice life. I know a lot of women that say that. And then it's like, all right, well, you know, but you know, you've got to go out. And it's also the case that in the 1970s, when divorce rates, you know, when no-fault divorce started to take off, then suddenly a bunch of women who were not in any career prospects found themselves in poverty, basically because they didn't have the education. That's a reality too. And so that's a very complex picture. And but yeah, a lot of the propaganda that's out there in the space that says, you know, it doesn't matter what men and husbands and wives make relative to each other. It just seems like hogwash.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people really care about it. And it skews in terms of men and women. Not all, it's generalizations. And like I said, I know one couple in mind used to go to this church. She's a very high-powered lawyer, and he was an artist. That relationship worked well for him. He could do art, he could do his little projects, he could do all that. She was making money, worked out really well. It can happen, and that's fine. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying, generally speaking, the women that I know want their men to bring home the dollars.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But I guess there's the whole, I guess you think of like the Betty for Dan thing, where I think it could create a potential problem in relationships if there's a disproportionate power dynamic, and whether it goes either way. And I mean, that's something that I deal with. Well, I deal with money, and I see it all the time where people get married. Sometimes I think, oh, this is my money, and it's like, no, if you get married, it's your money together. And
if you're using those kinds of, if you're using money as leverage in a marriage, there's also problems in the marriage, because you're playing, instead of sitting down and having a conversation and negotiating and come to some kind of mutual agreement, if one partner is using the fact that they're controlling the purse strings and manipulating the other person, there's just other issues.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's withholding money, for example. Like I knew a couple where the guy, he was self-employed and he was maybe 22 and he was making quite a bit of money, and he just decided, oh, I'll pay my taxes all at the end of the year when I file my tax return. And his wife, when they got married, was not on board with that. She's like, what are you doing? Why do you owe the government so much money when you file this return? Because I mean, obviously you could
instead of paying estimated taxes throughout the year?
Well, because you could get injured, or there could be a slowdown in your work or something like that. I mean, so there are reasons why you might.
I pay estimated taxes. Clergy are technically self-employed, and because I don't want that big tax bill at the end of the year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, so I mean, I think it's more stuff like that, or what do you spend money on it? If people aren't on the same wavelength, I think that could definitely create issues.
Yeah. No, that's
see
true.
that regularly, but
well, we should probably land the plane.
Okay.
But,
oh yeah, well, thank you for meeting with me today. I'm sorry I was a few minutes late. I will say
I was later than you.
Oh, okay. You weren't on yet either. Okay, that's fine. But no, it's funny, like accountant brain here. I'm looking at the email I got, like there's 3 different times on it, and I'm trying to figure it out because, well, it was your time and my time, so West Coast, East Coast. But then I think it must have also had Greenwich Mean Time, which is a standard on emails.
Yeah.
Because it said 6 p.m., which is 4 hours behind me. So,
yeah.
So I try to figure out, like, what am I doing this?
Yeah. Oh, no problem. No problem. Is this something that's okay to share? You want to look at it first, or
let's
you want me to bury it? It's up to you.
I feel like we've kept it pretty general. So why don't you go ahead, send it to me? I'll watch it on, or well, listen to it on my commute home, and probably send back and tell you it's okay.
That sounds fine. It's great talking to you, Sam.
Oh yeah, same here. Thank you, Paul, and yeah, good luck with your church and getting back in the swing of things and all that. Hopefully you're not feeling too discombobulated after some.
No, I'm getting back into it. I'm getting back into it.
Can you say a quick prayer before we head out today? Or
absolutely. I'd love to.
All right.
Lord, I thank you for Sam, and I thank you for his love for you, his love for your church, his love for his wife, and I pray, Lord, that you would bless him. I pray, Lord, that you'd give him the desires of his heart, and I pray, Lord, that you would you would make his way clear. So hear my prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks for everything.
All right, Sam. Take care. Bye-bye.